In the late 19th century, Pennsylvania was a place of transition. Coal mines tunneled deep into the earth, railroads stitched together distant towns, and small farming villages clung to their traditions against the advance of modern industry. It was a world divided between old and new, between whispers of superstition and the steady march of progress. Among these places sat a settlement known to locals simply as Klein Township, tucked quietly into the folds of the Shenandoah Valley. It was a modest community built around coal shafts, one church, a handful of shops, and the stubborn independence of its residents. Most of the men spent long days underground, emerging blackened with coal dust, while women kept homes running, tended gardens, and raised children in weathered clapboard houses. Life was harsh but steady. Yet, in 1885, something unsettling stirred. For reasons no one could fully explain, the town began to lose its voice literally. Families reported children waking one morning unable to speak. Women at market found their words failing mid-sentence, voices cracking into silence as if stolen by some unseen hand. Entire conversations fell apart, replaced by strained gestures and blank stares. Within weeks, it was said that nearly a third of the population had been stricken by this strange silence. At first, doctors blamed hysteria, a fashionable diagnosis of the time. Others muttered about a gas leak from the mines or the lingering effects of scarlet fever outbreaks that had swept nearby towns. But when prayers were offered in the church and the choir could no longer sing, whispers shifted toward something darker, that the town had been cursed. And at the center of these rumors, two figures were named again and again: the Keller sisters. Keller family had lived on the outskirts of Klein Township for decades. Their homestead was an aging farmhouse, its windows shaded by overgrown pines, standing just beyond the line where the town met the dense Appalachian forest. The father, once a miner, had died young in a shaft collapse. Their mother passed from consumption not long after. Left behind were Anna and Margaret Keller, girls who grew into women, largely ignored by their neighbors until the silence began. Anna, the elder, was known for her sharp intelligence and reclusive habits. She read old German prayer books and herbal manuals inherited from their grandmother, who herself had been whispered about as a wise woman. Margaret, younger by 5 years, was quieter, but carried a reputation for odd behaviors, speaking to herself, wandering barefoot at night through fields, and humming strange melodies no one else recognized. For years the sisters lived apart from the rhythms of town life, surviving on a small inheritance, a garden, and the occasional sale of herbs or remedies. But after the town's voices began vanishing, neighbors recalled strange encounters. Children said they saw Margaret standing at crossroads at dawn, whispering to the empty air. Others swore they heard Anna chanting near the church cemetery. Coincidence turned quickly into accusation. To understand how such suspicions grew, you must place yourself in the daily rhythm of the time. Imagine the homes lit by oil lamps, the dirt floors of mining cabins, the women sewing by firelight after spending the day hauling water and tending livestock. Imagine the sound of the coal trains at night, shrieking through valleys where darkness was otherwise absolute. Medicine was primitive, rooted more in folklore than science for many rural families. Diseases like diphtheria or scarlet fever could sweep through without warning, leaving households grieving overnight. The line between the natural and the supernatural blurred easily, especially in a community where German and Irish immigrants carried old-world superstitions into the coal valleys. It was in such a place that silence itself became terrifying. A child unable to call for their mother, a miner unable to shout a warning in the shafts. These were not inconveniences but dangers. And when fear demands an answer, people often seek someone to blame. By autumn of 1885, the story of the Vanishing voices had spread beyond Klein Township. Small newspapers in Pottsville and Hazleton reported briefly on the epidemic of muteness. Some journalists treated it as a curiosity, a medical oddity. Others leaned into sensationalism, suggesting witchcraft or dark rites carried out. In the forests. At the same time, doctors arrived, curious to examine the afflicted. They poked at throats, checked lungs, and examined blood. Yet, they could not find a clear explanation. The symptoms seemed to come and go. Some regained speech after days, others never did. There were no signs of tumors, no fevers, no swelling, just silence. With each passing week, suspicion hardened around the Keller sisters. "They've cursed us," some townsfolk whispered. "They've called on something." A few even claimed that on nights when the moon was low, strange lights could be seen flickering among the trees near the Keller property. Whether true or imagined, fear made the story grow. The church held meetings, urging townsfolk to resist superstition and remain calm. But coal towns were places of hard lives and harder fears. In the tavern, men muttered about taking care of it. Mothers clutched their children tighter, warning them never to wander near the Keller homestead. For the sisters themselves, little is recorded. Some claimed Anna grew more defiant, daring neighbors to confront her. Others said Margaret seemed haunted, retreating deeper into silence herself. A few accounts suggest that they pleaded innocence, insisting they were scapegoats. Yet no amount of denial quieted the accusations. By late October, the situation reached a breaking point. The town stood divided between those who saw medical mystery and those who believed they were living under a curse cast by the Keller women. And here, in this fragile coal town community, silence had become a weapon, fear its echo, and the Keller sisters its unwilling symbols. But the question lingers, were the Kellers truly connected to the vanishing voices, or had desperation made them the perfect scapegoats? When the affliction of silence spread beyond the children and began to claim the voices of miners, farmers, and even the town's priest, urgency mounted. In small towns, loss of speech was not merely curious, it was crippling. Contracts could not be negotiated, sermons could not be delivered, and the daily calls that kept a mining community safe could no longer be heard. Medical men from neighboring towns came by rail and carriage, bringing stethoscopes, crude diagnostic tools, and notepads filled with speculation. Some suggested lead poisoning from water pipes. Others blamed coal dust in the lungs. A few noted the possibility of a rare neurological disorder. But there was a problem. None of their examinations aligned. The victims showed no signs of fever, swelling, or wasting illness. Their bodies were strong, their breathing steady. And yet their voices failed as though someone had plucked words directly from their throats. When science falters, suspicion thrives. Soon, investigations turned less toward the body and more toward the unseen. Father Brennan, the parish priest, insisted the silence was a spiritual trial. He spoke of Job's suffering, of God's tests, and called upon the townsfolk to endure with patience and faith. Yet his sermons were weakened, for half of his parishioners could not respond, and in time, Father Brennan himself found his voice trembling and cracking until it, too, failed. When the shepherd of a flock falls silent, the fear of wolves grows stronger. In whispers, townsfolk began repeating the same name, the Keller sisters. The priest's final sermon, delivered in a strained rasp, mentioned wickedness among us, which many took as confirmation. Whether Brennan meant them or not, his silence after that day sealed their fate in the eyes of the fearful. By late November 1885, accusations were open and unrestrained. Townsfolk recalled past grievances and painted them anew. Didn't Anna refuse to kneel during Mass? One asked. Didn't Margaret once refuse bread from a neighbor's table? Such small refusals, harmless at the time, now became evidence of something darker. Children claimed Margaret taught them rhymes they could not repeat. Miners swore they had seen Anna staring at the mine entrance, murmuring words they could not understand. A midwife remembered the sisters handling herbs that no Christian woman should touch. None of this was evidence in the true sense, but In a town desperate for answers, suspicion was heavier than proof. As days shortened into winter, fear reshaped life. Neighbors who had once shared bread and tools now eyed each other warily. Families stopped sending children to school, fearing contagion. Coal production slowed because miners, unable to shout warnings or call for tools, worked in eerie silence. Imagine walking through Klein Township in those weeks. Snow dusting the rooftops, smoke rising from chimneys, but streets unnaturally quiet. Shopkeepers gesturing prices instead of calling them aloud. Mothers hushing children, not for noise, but because sound itself seemed dangerous, something that might vanish forever if overused. At the edges of this quiet world, the Keller farmhouse stood, its shutters closed, a thin trail of wood smoke the only sign of life. Few dared approach, and those who did claimed they heard murmurs inside, voices that had not yet vanished, voices that must have been preserved at the expense of the rest. On December 3rd, a group of men, miners mostly, hardened and fearful, marched toward the Keller home with lanterns and tools. They demanded Anna and Margaret step outside and explain themselves. According to later testimony, Anna did emerge, pale but unafraid, holding nothing but a lantern of her own. She denied wrongdoing, her voice firm. Margaret stood behind her, silent, eyes wide. The men hurled accusations. "You've cursed us. You've stolen our voices. You consort with devils." Anna repeated her innocence. At last she is said to have shouted, "If you believe I hold your voices, then search this house and take them back yourselves." Some men balked at entering. Others did search. They found nothing, no charms, no hidden jars of herbs, no strange writings. Only the bare furnishings of a poor household, a bed, a stove, a Bible, shelves of books. The men left dissatisfied. Yet in their anger, they told neighbors that the very emptiness of the house proved guilt, for witches hide their tools well. Word of the vanishing voices spread beyond Pennsylvania's valleys. Journalists came again, eager for a sensational tale. One paper in Philadelphia printed an article titled, "A Town Gone Silent Cursed by Sisters of the Forest." The piece described Klein Township as a community smothered by a whispering plague. This outside attention did little to help the Keller sisters. Rather, it confirmed to locals that their plight was extraordinary, even monstrous. Outsiders came seeking spectacle, not truth. And when they left, their articles carried the sisters' names farther than the women could ever escape. Not everyone in Klein Township believed in curses. A young physician, Dr. Thomas Wainwright, argued publicly that the affliction was environmental. He suspected toxic air from coal seams leaking into homes. He gathered samples of water and air, writing long notes. Yet he admitted his results were inconclusive. Still, he warned the townsfolk that persecution of the Keller sisters was misplaced. He urged patience, study, and restraint, but restraint was a luxury few could afford. The silence persisted, deepened. Families that regained their voices found them weak, strained, and quickly lost again. And all the while, the sisters remained the single explanation that everyone could understand. By Christmas 1885, the town was a shadow of itself. The church choir could not sing hymns. Children opened gifts in silence. Carols were hummed, not sung. The air was filled with absence, the kind of emptiness that makes each sound a shock. That winter was bitterly cold, and coal miners struggled to keep pace with demand. Accidents increased because warnings could not be called. One cave-in claimed 6 lives. Rescuers swore that muffled voices could be heard below ground, but no shouts carried upward. For the townsfolk, the tragedy was the final straw. The sisters have brought death, people muttered. On the first Sunday of January 1886, a mob gathered after Mass. They marched, not toward the mines nor the town hall, but toward the Keller homestead once again. This time, the sisters did not emerge willingly. The crowd shouted at their door, demanding confession. demanding release from the curse. When Anna finally appeared, her face drawn, she held no lantern, no Bible, only Margaret's hand. Witnesses later claimed her words were chilling. "If you believe we have taken your voices, then tell me, how are you shouting at us now?" It was a clever deflection, but it enraged rather than soothed. The mob surged forward. Some threw stones at the house. Others threatened to burn it down. Only the intervention of a few calmer townsfolk prevented violence that night. The sisters retreated once more. But the town was past the point of patience. The months that followed would bring inquiries, further tragedies, and finally, the collapse of the Keller sisters' place in the community. Yet even as fear grew, the mystery of the silence remained unsolved. No cure was found, no clear cause uncovered. And so the question remained, pressing upon every family that suffered. Were the Keller sisters truly guilty, or had fear turned coincidence into accusation? By February of 1886, the silence that had spread through Klein Township had become the defining feature of daily life. Families had grown accustomed to communicating with gestures, crude signs, or by scribbling notes on scraps of paper. Children in school learned their lessons without recitation. The church bells still rang, but few could answer their call with hymns. The community was changing, not just in how it spoke, but in how it believed. And the belief most firmly planted in the minds of many was that the Keller sisters bore the responsibility. For some, they were seen as witches. For others, as scapegoats who, guilty or not, provided a way to explain the inexplicable. Either way, the sisters' isolation deepened. Dr. Thomas Wainwright continued his efforts to investigate a natural explanation. He spent long hours in the mines collecting samples of air, water, and coal. He noted strange odors in certain shafts and discovered elevated levels of sulfur dioxide. His theory was that gas exposure, compounded by poor ventilation in homes, might have caused temporary paralysis of the vocal cords. But in an era before toxicology was well understood, his conclusions held little sway. To the townsfolk, the Keller sisters were a simpler answer. They could not see or understand gases in the air, but they could see Anna's sharp eyes and Margaret's unsettling silences. Wainwright petitioned the county to intervene, warning that violence against the sisters was imminent. The county authorities sent word that they would look into it, but rural valleys were often left to settle their own affairs. Help would not come in time. On the night of February 14, 1886, a group of townsfolk gathered once more outside the Keller home. It was bitter cold, the moon dim behind drifting clouds. This time, they brought not only lanterns but torches. Some carried shovels, others axes. They shouted for the sisters to come out. When no answer came, stones struck the windows. At last, the door opened and Anna stepped out, Margaret close behind her. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some said Anna begged for peace, claiming again their innocence. Others swore she cursed the crowd, warning that their voices would never return. Some claimed Margaret spoke for the first time in weeks, whispering words no one could understand. What is certain is that violence broke out. The sisters were dragged from their home. Some demanded they be cast into the forest. Others cried for fire. By dawn, the Keller farmhouse was ash. Witnesses claimed the sisters perished in the blaze, their bodies never recovered. Others insisted they escaped into the woods, vanishing into the pines, never to be seen again. The truth was never firmly established. What remained was the smoldering ruin of their home and a community divided between relief and unease. In the weeks following the fire, something curious happened. Some residents claimed their voices slowly returned. Children began to whisper again, miners to call out in the shafts. By spring, much of the silence had lifted. Was it coincidence? Was the end of winter and the clearing of gases enough to restore speech? Or had the destruction of the sisters somehow lifted a curse? The townsfolk believed what they wanted to believe. By summer of 1886, Klein Township began to recover, though never fully. The story of the vanishing voices lingered, carried to other towns by journalists and travelers. The Keller sisters became a cautionary tale, invoked whenever strange illness struck or when superstition needed a name. Dr. Wainwright continued his studies, publishing a short paper suggesting environmental poisoning as the likely cause. But his voice was small against the tide of folklore. His writings were forgotten in dusty archives, while the legend of the haunted Keller sisters spread across Pennsylvania and beyond. Parents warned children not to wander near abandoned houses. Coal miners told the story by lantern light underground. Some said, even decades later, that voices could be heard on the wind in the valleys where the sisters had once walked. For the people of Klein Township, life resumed its harsh rhythms. Men returned to the mines, women to their gardens and kitchens, children to their schooling. Yet silence remained a presence. Families spoke more softly, wary of raising their voices. The community became quieter, more cautious, as though afraid sound itself could vanish again. The absence of the Keller family left a scar. Their land, though fertile, lay fallow. No one would farm it, no one would rebuild the house. Travelers who passed through remarked on the lonely chimney standing in a field of weeds, the only remnant of the sisters' home. As years passed, the tale changed in the telling. Some said the sisters had indeed been witches, who took the voices of the town as offerings to darker forces. Others painted them as martyrs, innocent women destroyed by ignorance and fear. Still others claimed they lived on, wandering the forests, their whispers riding the wind. Folklore has a way of filling gaps where history leaves silence. And so, the story of the vanishing voices became less about illness or science, and more about mystery, morality, and the dangers of fear. Looking back, you might wonder, were the Keller sisters guilty of anything beyond being different? Did their solitude, their strange habits, and their inheritance of old country knowledge seal their fate more than any true cause? Or was Dr. Wainwright closer to the truth, that the silence was a product of poisoned air, not witchcraft? If so, then the town destroyed its own innocence while the real culprit was the very ground beneath their feet. And yet, perhaps the deeper lesson lies not in proving guilt or innocence, but in understanding how communities under stress seek explanations. In the absence of certainty, fear demands answers. And too often, those answers are found in scapegoats.